No, going back to what you're saying, it's interesting because in the beginning, ideas drive the story, and it helps you build your outline, and you go into the story. If you're an outliner, sometimes the ideas jump right into the story for people who are pantsers, and but then once you start to sort of build out the story then starts to drive the ideas. It starts to drive new ideas, and it starts to drive some old ideas out. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really interesting circular process because then those new ideas then start to drive the story, and you just keep going back and forth until you get through. Uh, hey, this is Writer's Row. I'm DC Wright-Hammer.
I'm David Gane.
And if you like what you've been seeing and hearing on Writer's Row, make sure to subscribe to this channel, subscribe to our podcasts on Apple and Google and Spotify. Give this video a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. All of that support really helps us out, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah. So I'm asking you this, but I feel like you should be asking
How
me
about I
this
just
today.
ask you, David, what are we talking about on this show?
Well, you and I were talking a bit about the idea of building the idea of your story, and you were kind of trying to lead it towards how do you build out a story. And I've been having a lot of conversations, especially with students lately. A part of my writer in residency at the Regina Public Library, and a lot of them are just trying to figure out how to build out the idea itself, right? Like they're oh, I got to write a story. What do I write about?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that would be actually an interesting conversation. And then as you and I talked about this before the camera started rolling, you kind of were like, "Well, no, it's pretty easy. You have no idea, then you have an idea." I'm like, let's expand that. Let's unpack that a
Right.
bit.
Well,
And
so Well, I was going to say the phrase that came to my mind was, how do you build your idea toolbox? How do you fill in your idea toolbox? Basically, because you can, for me, and we can dig in. Ideas just come to me as I'm going, like plot points and characters and scenes and things like that. They just kind of pop into my head, but um, they're not fully formed, they're not useful in a lot of cases, and so the way I think about it, and what I like to ask other writers and what I like to think about it is, what's in your idea toolbox? What do you got waiting around, that you have, how have you filled that in the past and then translated that into stories? But what's the process of filling that? What is in your idea toolbox, and how did it get there? Like, those are really fascinating questions.
so as you were talking, I was actually remembering this is like going way back to one of the early episodes. We were talking to WB, and
Mhm.
she talked about she would fill in a notebook with all her ideas. So that was, I think, her short story collection of horror
Yep.
was based on just pulling out from that notebook. So I feel like your idea of things just come and plop into your head, and then you're like, oh, I gotta. Her, she kind of builds on that, and she just writes all the ideas down into a book and pulls from that. And I've heard a lot of writers who do that. Um, but sometimes I always when I wasn't writing, but always wanted to write kind of thing, I would have tons and tons of ideas and I'd fill books and books and books all the time. And then when I finally did start writing, I actually felt like I had moved through a log jam, where all the old ideas were jammed up in my brain, and I wrote them down on the page and discovered how crap, I'm going to say it, how shitty they really were. Um, and, and, but then once I got them out of there, then I suddenly had a big hole in my head, and there was nothing to fill it right away, right? So then I had to start digging for new ideas and looking for ideas. And think about Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, which if you haven't, if you're a struggling writer or artist of any type, it's a fantastic book just to try and help guide you back to the creative source. And I guess DC's going to link it down below.
We'll link that one.
Awesome. So she always had this thing. She had 3 activities that I always loved. Or I guess there are 2 activities and they did one thing. The first one was always morning pages. So every morning you woke up, you write 3 pages in a journal, 3 full pages, which comes out to about 770 words for those of you who like to do the typing like me. And then the other thing is she had artist dates. So each week you had to force yourself to go out and do something, whether it was like a half hour or an hour, not with anyone else, but with yourself, whether it was like going for a walk in nature or going to a museum or an art gallery or something like that. And the process that she talked about, what this all did was called filling the well. So you got your empty well in your head and you just pour stuff into it. And to me, that's kind of a fantastic image and a process to go with. And I do have something else I want to add to that, but I want you to talk so I'm not taking up the entire episode.
Oh, that's all right. For me, writing is a very cathartic process. And so if there are things going on in my life, that tends to become part of the ideas that I want to write about. It's almost like using fiction as a journal to some extent, but finding part of the fun in doing it is how can I weave this into the story in an organic way? Oh, hi, Kat.
We have not had a cat appearance in quite some time, I feel, so this is
All
very
right.
exciting.
People haven't seen. All right, I'm giving them the little cat view. There you go. You got it.
And everyone watching just vomited.
And all the podcast people are like, "What? You promised me
There's
a
a
cat?
cat?
Come
I
on!"
gotta watch the video now too.
Yeah, they're just gonna have to go out to YouTube and subscribe to that, even though they're watching the podcast. I mean, listening to the podcast.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway,
I was like, wait, I can't point at anything if that's the point.
so
Anyway,
my ideas very much are what's kind of going, bouncing around my head in my personal life that I need to deal with, and how can I put my characters through that to help me get through it, deal with
sort it out in your own life.
yeah, and that was actually really super helpful. So, and those ended up becoming themes. Like in the first book, there's themes of fatherhood. There's themes of like um, failing. There's themes of like all kinds of different like self-doubt and whatnot. That's in book 1. Book 2 shifts, and I talked about this in another episode where imposter syndrome is a theme because that's what I was feeling when I was writing it. And so how can I organically and authentically sneak that into my stories? And so a lot of my ideas for themes and for sort of character backgrounds and character, what are the characters going through, or really what I'm going through, and that has proven really well through 2 books. The problem is I've written those out. I feel like I've used those ideas, and now I don't have those. The things I'm going through now don't translate well. In fact, the ideas I'm having work better for other stories, and so now I have this sci-fi series that's 2 books in, but now I have like 4 or 5 or maybe more other works in progress that that I want to use to get through some of these ideas, but it's becoming not manageable, and I feel like I'm not making much progress because I've got all these ideas now, and so I've got that backlog that you talked about.
So the other process that I find that I've used to talk to students is there's actually 2 things that I would suggest. I'm going to reference another book. Oh no, I forget the title of it. It's an Austin Kleon book. Steal Like an Artist, I believe is the name of it. And he talks a lot about finding ideas in other people's work and using that to be inspired and everything. Not outright steal and all that kind of stuff, but I know he references, I think, Picasso, and there's a couple of musicians that would build off of other people's ideas. And I always like the story. John Ford hated high noon, and so he went out and decided to make his like anti-high noon film just to be able to like he wanted to put his version on it. And there's some tech people who say create out of anger. So like if you don't like something, make something out of it to in response to that anger. Um, but I do say to a lot of students is like draw your sources from a lot of different places. Like if you like a certain type of film, draw ideas out of it and use it. If you know, have a favorite TV show, use that. If you have, music or painting or whatever, use those things to pull up and draw into your work always. Um, and then there's this old graphic I found on the internet. I don't even know who did it, but I always kind of liked it, which was it's like basically it's a three different versions of creative work, and one is copy, which is basically stealing, so you got to be careful with that. Um, Transform is the other one, which is taking two ideas and squishing them together and turning it into a third kind of thing. Or the other one is combine, which is kind of taking two ideas and squishing them together and doesn't really form a third thing. It's like a mishmash of the stuff. So one's kind of like straight out copy, one's combining two together, and then one's taking it and then elevating it to a higher level. So I always like that, telling students that idea, which is, don't just draw from the world around you, whether it's media or the actual world around you, right? Like I think you're a good example. You're taking things from your own personal life and kind of smashing it into this
Yep.
science fiction world and transforming it into something else. And also, it's a really good creative outlet for all that inside of you, right? So,
Yeah, and I think writing, just the writing portion of it, not the whole publishing process or anything like that, but just getting ideas and put them on paper. Just put words on the page, because you'd be surprised at how many ideas don't translate as you start to type them out. And that's okay too. Like, you're just putting them out there and you're like, okay, this isn't going to quite work for a story or something like that. But you're not going to know unless you really put it on the page. And then what I find is as I put ideas down, as I start to write, they lead to other ideas. And then the creative juices start flowing, and that's when you can start to really flesh them out. Doesn't mean you're going to necessarily jump right into a story, but it's another tool in your writer toolbox that you can say, okay, I know I've got this concept, this character, this scene, this theme, or whatever it is, and I've kind of written, 2, 3, 400 words or whatever. If it's 700 words, fine. But I've gotten it out of my head now, and it's sort of the idea levels up in your head or evolves now. It's no longer what it originally was, because before it was just in your head and it was sort of vague. You've put words to it, and now you can kind of move on from there. You can use that in a different way, better way, or you've determined that it's not useful right now. Save that work, save that idea off, and move on. The good news is now you're helping to alleviate that logjam that you were talking about earlier, David, for what's the next idea up. Or if you don't have any, I think we always have ideas floating around in our head, but sometimes we need a catalyst for them.
Yeah, I'm saying no, man.
I think they're there. I think they're there, and I think you just need a catalyst to bring them to the fore. Because we're a mishmash of everything we've been throughout our whole life. The ideas, a lot of them are there, and you never know. You look at a tree, and suddenly you want to talk about how glorious its bark is. Like, but the gloriousness of the bark was there. The idea of that was there before you stared at the tree. The tree just is what brought it out of you. That's the way I look at it.
All right. I still say you can be an empty hole, and that's okay. You just got to fill it. I like my empty well, okay?
You can
It's
have an
good to
empty well.
get out all the it's good to get all the bad stuff out of there. Um, the other thing that I was gonna say about what you were talking about putting it down on the page is I always believe that you can't it's hard to keep an entire story in your head and putting it on the page. I always encourage because even if it's shitty, there's my second one.
Yep.
But really, like seriously, we can't be writing perfect prose all the time, and so you kind of have to accept that you're going to put shitty stuff on the page, and then you're going to just have to. I guess more what I was going to say was that once it's on the page, then it's a physical thing, and you can manipulate it and change it and rearrange it and cut it and start transforming it and everything. Sculpting the clay is, I guess, the best way to describe it.
Sure.
So, and once you get it on the page and you start sculpting it, yeah, I agree with you. You start making newer connections and new ideas come out of it, and you transform it into the beautiful prose that you want it.
Right. And
Right.
well, going back to what you said about copying, right? We
Yeah.
should plagiarize. That's bad.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
if there's a particular paragraph or page or set of words that are out there and you're just kind of playing around in a word processor, you can copy and paste. Like you can like put that there and then you can start changing things up and making it your own and seeing like reverse engineer what this like great paragraph or chapter or something like that that really kind of got your mind going, and you can reverse engineer that and start playing with the words and scenes and changing it up. It's almost like fan fiction. Not something you'd necessarily publish, but it could be a good exercise to try to figure out how the author that you like got where they got, and see if you can kind of take yourself there with the ideas that you have, and try to figure out why you liked that particular section of work. What was the culmination of, and see if you can take yourself there by using that sort of copy paste and then reverse engineering as a way to stimulate the ideas in your head. I don't know if that would work or not, but it sounds pretty neat to
Okay,
try.
I know this is totally not a part of how do you build the idea, but two exercises that I used to do that I really, really like and enjoyed were I used to just write uh, a paragraph instead of doing the copy and paste, actually physically type out favorite paragraphs just to kind of get inside the rhythm of that sentence. And then a more like technical approach to it is write out a sentence and then like cut it apart and see where the nouns are, where the verbs are, how did they construct those sentences,
Right.
um, where are the commas, all that kind of stuff, just so you can start really figuring out like what is that thing that you really liked about it. The other thing I wanted to talk about, because I'm sure no one knows that I have a writing partner because I never mention her very much. I
Sure.
don't know if that's funny or not because sometimes I don't know if I do mention her enough. Anyways, uh, her and I, when we come up with an idea, it's usually we lock ourselves in this room and she sits on the couch that's right back there. And I walk back and forth in front of this desk and it's a lot of me pacing and her writing ideas, and then I'll turn to her and say, okay, why does the character do this thing? And
Hmm.
then she'll answer that question. And so when we're doing idea story generation, that's the process for a couple of weeks, is planning the whole story out, pacing back and forth, asking questions, talking through the story. So it's kind of like we are developing it out of nowhere, but we also are, I'll ask a question and then Ange will spend some time and just tell me a story about something. And I'll be like, okay, I like this idea and I like this idea. Let's consider that.
Well,
And then we can play with that for a bit and then we build out our story that way. So I think if I had something in my writer's toolbox, that would definitely be it. And back in the day when we used to do this, and we had a bit more space, we used to do it on big pieces of paper and paste them to the wall, or tape them to the wall. I shouldn't say paste because that would be bad. And this is when we were doing scripts more. And I would walk, like I would literally start on the left-hand side and tell the story to Ange and point to each piece of paper and say, this is what happens. And then this leads us to this, and this leads us to this. And that was my idea of how we built our stories out all the time. And I loved it because not only were we telling the story, but I was walking through the story, if that makes sense.
mm-hmm.
And that physical, like moving from one scene to the next scene, and you travel through it. And I covered a bunch of this in my masters when I was doing my masters, because it's a whole literary theory that goes on there, and I really love that process of just actually walking through story in that way. So I'm skipping over the actual literary theory because I don't want to get into it, but yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I think what you're saying is you can have ideas and you can work them out while doing, so you're saying you're physically walking, you're bouncing them off, you're being social. And so I think the idea that you have to have ideas in a vacuum, or like you have to be this like just idea generator, some the things that are just going to come to you, like things do pop into my head, but I guess that's really early on in the stage of ideation, I think is what they call it, the
Yep.
process of coming up with ideas. um, but that you should combine it with other activities, like you're saying, taking a walk or listening to music, or going and seeing a movie with this idea purposefully in your head. Like the other night, we saw the movie Joker, and in my head I had some critiques going in about the story and how it relates to characters that I kind of have floating around in my head. There was a particular criticism that came out of the movie that said that
Are you
the
going to give me spoilers? Because I don't want
no, no, no.
spoilers.
There was a criticism that the movie was mostly aesthetic and violence, and it was lacking in substance. The story was, and so watching it, I wanted to see how true that was, and I really focused on the characters and the story, and I tried to sort of blur out as much of the aesthetic and the violence, that's in it. And really just tried to focus and really tried to put myself and the characters in my head in the positions that I saw in the movie. And I thought that was really helpful to me to bring along some characters that I have had, just kind of up there. And what I liked about what they portrayed in the characters in the movie, what I didn't like, what I thought was realistic versus what was artistic, things like that. And no, I think that is a good way to start to go from those ideas and then start to transition to the story side of it, which I think is a good transition for this episode. In you've got a toolbox, you've been fostering these ideas forever. So I'll just ask you the question. So you've been pacing back and forth, you're pasting stuff on paper, you got all this, okay, but now we've got to turn it into a story, David. What do we do?
You write the story. That's what you do.
Just write it, right? It's just a compilation of ideas, and
Write like a
that's it.
mofo, man.
Right.
Yeah, no. For us, our process is we do have an outline.
Yep.
Um, so then it's just find the time to put that down. Um, and yeah, you may still need to rebuild it or fix it as you go along, but um, yeah, I think and in the moment you can make discoveries and make connections that you never made before, and that's the beauty of doing the writing as well and putting it on paper, right? It's testing that idea out and seeing if it stands or if you actually don't believe it in the moment, and then you have to rework it. So, I don't know. I think what is it that most ideas never actually are building out of something, and I'm going against myself, but most ideas don't come from nothing. It's usually you combining things. But I will say that you can still have the black hole, and you have to find the pieces first and then combine them and test them. And then if it passes, then cool, move on. And
Right.
if it fails, then you have to go back and say, okay, what do I need to do to make this tweak? And um, that's another place where you were talking about the walking and stuff. I love, I walk so much when I'm writing, or I need to run or whatever, just to let the idea gestate. And I feel like recently I had my pup pass away. He was
Hmm.
my best version of like going out and figuring out the next step of a story. I'd be like, okay, Bamboo, let's go. We gotta figure out the next chapter. So yeah, yeah. Yeah, I didn't mean to bring it down. I'm
That's all right.
sorry.
Hey, you missed your pup. It's okay to bring. Here on Writers Row,
It's
we we
all a feeling,
yeah,
caring space.
we like to honor our loved ones, um, and
As your
so
cat wanders around in the background at the
right,
end of the
very
day.
yeah. She actually, I think she got fed, so I think she's going to be okay now.
Oh,
But
okay.
no, going back to what you're saying, it's interesting because in the beginning, ideas drive the story, and it helps you build your outline, and you go into the story. You know, if you're an outliner, sometimes the ideas jump right into the story for people who are pantsers, and but then once you start to sort of build out the story then starts to drive the ideas. It starts to drive new ideas, and it starts to drive some old ideas out. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really interesting circular process because then those new ideas then start to drive the story, and you just keep going back and forth until you get through, until you've hit the end on the keyboard, and go from there. So that's this really interesting, and in the end, the story is just a set of ideas, but it's the concrete path in which you started to develop. Getting the reader from point A to point B, or getting your wherever you want your story to go from point A to point B. And so I think people need to embrace that back and forth of the nebulous, which tools do I need here to draw, move the story forward? Which tools do I need to create, put in the toolbox, and just use for this story? And then I've used them, and going back and forth. I don't know that many writers think about it like that, and I know that I don't necessarily. I'm like, oh, I'm back and forth between story and idea, but I think taking a moment to consider how that kind of happens just so naturally while you're writing, it's really fun. It's really cool idea to think about, and um, hopefully that doesn't like people try to focus on that the next time they write, and
Oh
suddenly
yeah, never.
they're like, "What? Now you've cursed me with this back and forth between idea and story, and now I can't figure it out."
Oh, that's a quick way to get yourself all slowed down and failing. Um, yeah, no, it's that idea, you do the practice as regular as possible, and then you just let it go when it's game day sort of thing, right? So,
No, that's a good point. Go break a leg. Don't actually break a leg, but
yeah.
just wing it, and everyone has their process. I think probably what's helpful for this episode is to just really analyze those processes for a moment, because I think we do take them for granted as writers, because for a lot of us it just comes to us. And I'm hoping that there are a few people out there that are like, they might be like, okay, how do I get into this whole writing thing? And there's some authors out there who might be stuck, and just taking a little meta approach to it of, okay, let's go back to square one. We need some ideas, and how do we get them? We have some. We need some input. We need some, we need to put ourselves in a place that is conducive to creating ideas. And then once you feel like you have them, start to do something with them. Start to combine them in your head, eventually get them on the page, and eventually start moving them towards more of a story form. So,
Well, and I'm going to say a couple of things. I think you should always be trying to fill up your toolbox because it always helps you, right? Sooner or later, you're going to probably come to that one story problem that you don't have the tool that you need. And the more you fill that toolbox, the better it's going to be. Second of all, the best way to fill that toolbox is always to try and have to explain it to other people, and build on that. Because the more you try and explain, oh, how do you get an idea? Well, here are some ideas. And then you get a conversation going, and then you hear other people's ideas. You know, it gives you a really good way to take that step back and say, oh, wait a second, how do I actually do this sort of stuff? So doing writers row interviews is always good. Any like interviews that you do as an author is a fantastic process. And then just teaching it, like do like hey, I'm going to teach you guys how to build a story to a local community group. That's fantastic way as well. So it's the teacher in me. I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I in a previous life I taught as well, and I taught engineering. So we talked about the design process, basically taking something from, and not the design process, because there's really a whole lot of different design processes to get from not having something to getting it to a point where it can be built. Um, and yeah, I would have junior high and high school students, and you wanted in that scenario, we would tell a story. I did this one activity that was super simple. It was basically like, hey, you've been contracted to build the tallest tower in Chicago. You have one, we need to see a prototype, but we want it to be super simple. So you get one piece of computer paper, 7 inches of masking tape, and you've got to build the tallest tower you can to show us that you can, ultimately win this contract and build it out. And that story, you should have seen, whether it was seventh graders or 12th graders, the ideas that just started coming to their head about how they can cut the paper, how they can cut the tape, how they can conserve resources, how they can work together as a team. There's just this element of, going through this motion of putting yourself in a position and sort of role playing, even though they knew it, we never left the classroom. But in their minds, they left the classroom. They were in Chicago. We were talking about being a contractor. We were now playing a role, and then they look down and they have to win the contract by cutting up this piece of paper or not cutting it up, or however folding it and taping it. And it was just fun to step back after I gave them all the instructions and just let them figure it out, because you would see some people be doing something, and like I told them, nobody can walk around the room to see what others are doing, but if you peek, I'm not going to stop people from peeking. And so they would
Because
look
it happens
around.
in the real world.
Exactly. So they would look around and be like, oh, they're doing this. We got to do that. But they can't see all the details. And they weren't there for the idea, create the process that they got to those things. So now you've got people who are trying to skip steps to do all this stuff. And it was a ton of fun. And, I think if you are going from, no story to you want to go to story, start to put yourself in there, role play it, put it on paper. Like you said, talk to people, have a good people who will give you good feedback and that you can bounce it off of, and have fun with it. I think that's the other side of it too, is if you're not having fun with it,
Why are you
skip it.
doing it?
Yeah, skip it. Just don't even consider it. Put yourself there. Let the ideas flow. And if that turns into a cool novel, great. If it turns into a poem, that's awesome. If it turns into something at all, fine. If it turns into nothing, that's okay. Like we are creative. Most of us, a lot of us have these creative instincts. We want to do things that are creative and just, enjoy that. And then if something great comes out of it, that's fine.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's an excellent place to end this, isn't it?
It is.
Awesome. You did
Uh,
great, DC. Good job.
you did all right, David.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
No, you did just fine. There.
I think the first one was more sincere.
Are you sure? Do you
Put
want
your
to?
comments down below and let us know.
No, they won't. No, they're not going to comment down below, David. They never comment down below.
Is this some reverse psychology, DC?
Maybe, maybe not. It works on my 3-year-old.
Okay, we'll see if our viewers are 3-year-olds.
Maybe. No, they can on YouTube. They can comment. If you're listening to the podcast, reach out to us on Twitter, things like that.
Yeah, please
and
do.
and I am pitching the podcast again. Apple, Google, Spotify, among others. There's some that I haven't even heard of that apparently we're on, which is cool with me. But yeah, if you're listening to that and you got anything you want to share with us, definitely hit us up on Twitter, DC Wright-Hammer or David Gane, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Are you going to plug anything, DC?
I got nothing else. I just am pushing that podcast like crazy.
Okay. I'm going to push cunosandgane.com. We have a newsletter. Please sign up. We try and put we get together and build that newsletter together. So,
Nice.
yeah, please look at it and give us subscribe. That's all I'm asking. That's all I want.
It's in the description down below.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, DC.
Yep. Thank you, David, and thanks everyone who has watched.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Catch you next time.